Hello and welcome again to Christopher Shaw Residential. I am here with my colleague James Tiller for another video, and this one today is going to be following up from a video you may have seen previously, which was touching on EPCs with Craig from Very Smart. We have actually got a specialist who's come on with us today to kind of dig deeper into that and give hopefully some advice on what to do over coming months, weeks, months and years. This is Peter Bywater from Ridgewater Energy. We've actually worked with Peter on a few kind of landlord projects and referred him already to a few landlords that have actually used his services to make their properties more compliant on the previous threshold, which was increased in recent years. So a good contact to have. So welcome, Peter, and thank you for jumping on with us.
No, thank you very much. No, thank you for having me. Yeah, absolute pleasure to be on today.
So can you just explain, Peter, just briefly what you do? Obviously, we've had an EPC assessor. What is it you do in relation to kind of energy efficiency measures?
Okay, so we're a project management organisation, effectively. Myself and my business partner have both got a background working for the last 25 years locally. Mm-hmm. And in that time, we've done a lot of work for local landlords. Some of the usual suspects typically pop up, but we first did a designated council-backed landlord scheme. It started in 2005, where we helped out about 1,000 landlords who own property within the conurbation, and that resulted in about 5,500 buildings containing about 15,000 dwellings getting insulated for free under that scheme. Yeah. So we put a lot of our experience of the type of properties that we come across in the rental sector, who's behind the door, and what sort of assistance they need as the tenant as well, but also giving best advice to the landlord as how they can get things delivered at the lowest possible cost, taking advantage of all the assistance that's available at the time. So we keep completely up to date with all the grants that are available nationally as well as locally. And locally, it's usually us that deliver those on behalf of the local authorities and work with other agencies to bring that additional support into the sector.
So, Peter, what support actually is there for landlords to help them improve energy efficiency in their properties?
Well, I think the key thing to start off with before you think about any measures is getting the right advice. I think one thing that we've all of us here have experienced is when a landlord's gone off and they've taken advice from someone who's looking to actually do the physical work for them. Being pessimistic, they've got a vested interest in recommending what they're recommending because they can install it. But they don't necessarily have the expertise on the energy efficiency side. And the best example of that is electric heating. An electric on-peak heater is 100% efficient at the point of use. That is not the same as saying that it is energy efficient. It just means that the electricity that goes into it, on 100% of it, gets turned into useful heat. But regards to the losses in transmission from getting electricity to where it's generated to actually into someone's home, it's significant and adds to the cost of that fuel. So I know you had someone on talking about before about the Roynty heaters, for example, being a penny an hour to run. Yeah. No Roynty heater that I've ever seen has been a penny an hour to run. What you should always look at when you're looking at heaters like that is what is the wattage of that heater. Obviously, 1 kilowatt is 1,000 watts. You've got a 330 watt heater. It's going to take 3 hours to use a unit of electricity. Up until very recently, that unit was 17.2 pence per unit. So it's 3 hours effectively for 17.2 pence. But if they've recently had to change tariff and been put onto a non-capped energy tariff now, it could be paying anything from 30 pence to 42 pence a unit for that electricity. So point one with that is obviously it doesn't do the EPC rating any good, putting an on-peak electric heater on, especially if you've got an old storage heater currently running on an off-peak tariff. But key thing as well is the tenant. The tenant can't afford to heat the place, then you're going to have maintenance issues. You're going to spend more money on redecoration. You're more likely to get arrears on your rent and all those other issues that come along with it.
So thing, Pete, isn't it? Because we've obviously dealt with a few of these recently, and obviously they talk about the quantum Dimplex high heat retention night storage heaters. Now, us as kind of people who've grown up in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, showing our age, a bit older than you, James, but obviously they are regarded as you don't want to rent a property with those heaters. The night storage they have a horrible reputation. Yet we're being told by various people that kind of recommend these, that those are the ones that you should have if you've got electric heating.
Well, there's some major differences between what they install now and what they used to install. So the reason they originally designed the storage heater was specifically to dump a load of unwanted electricity generation from the new nuclear power that had come online during that time.
Yeah.
So that's when they first brought these storage heaters through, in large volume. And it was basically, they were basically designed, I think, originally by companies like Southern Electric, so they could actually get that electricity sold. So they were designed to leak heat. That's what they were designed to do. So when you hear people saying, I've got old storage heaters and they've run out of heat by 12 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that's why. They weren't insulated heaters. They weren't in no way developed to do anything but just leak loads of heat out of them.
Yeah.
A high heat retention heater, as the name would suggest, is a super insulated unit, which is very cleverly thermostatically controlled with open window technology, with all sorts of other functionality, room by room, heater by heater, so you can control them individually. I'm going to sound like a Dimplex sales rep here. And they're about 27 to 30% more efficient than an older storage heater. So you see that kind of reflected in the costs. Again, it's paramount that someone, when they fit them, is given that tenant some advice on how to use them as well. And a landlord might want to think about having some sort of guide for new tenants moving in to say, this is how to set them up. If your lifestyle is at home all day, it's this setting. If it's at work all day, it's this setting. And they're getting the most out of it and the most efficiency out of it. But the reason they perform well on the RD SAP is because they have got that controllability, they have got that increased efficiency, and that they use less energy than an older storage heater.
So what are the next steps available to landlords if their rating, the EPC rating's not where they want it to be? So obviously we hear about 2025 and raising the standard up to a C band. If a landlord's looking at their EPC and they say they're not there yet, what should they do next?
Well, I think the important thing is to look at the options, and different landlords will approach it in different ways. Some landlords will purely be interested in the lowest possible cost route to market. They'll only want to scrape through to the next banding, and that's where they're happy to be. Whereas other landlords might think, well, I'm going to play the long game here, and I'm actually going to invest now in getting these measures done, so I haven't then got to double back on this in another 5 or 10 years and spend even more money. And I think that's what people are going to find. With a threshold potentially going up to 10,000 from 3.5, is that you really want to be in control as a landlord. You want to be calling the shots, not being told what to do and when to do it. So if you look at more from a capital kind of tax allowance point of view, and how can you maximise what you're investing in your property against the tax allowances you've got, and do it in a measured way, that's probably a better way than be reliant on either government or council support, or being told what to do and actually given an enforcement notice to do it. So I think it's very much about planning, starting with the low cost measures first. Things like LED light bulbs, things like double glazing. They're expensive, they don't achieve a lot, but actually if the property can have double glazing, it's probably a good idea to get on and do it, because the way the fuel bills are going and the cost of the tenant of running properties that aren't up together is yet another factor. And it's something you can do window by window or door by door. You don't have to do it all at once, So it's worth kind of planning those into your kind of almost like a maintenance plan for the property, so you can do that as you go along. There'll probably never be any funding for things like double glazing, because it's only 15% of the heat loss from most properties, against a quite a high cost measure if you're looking at £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 a window, whatever it might be. You've then got some simple things like, even when you've got a hot water cylinder that's already got spray foam around it, sometimes by adding a jacket onto that, if there's space, you can again gain some points on the EPC. On an insulated cylinder where you're running an on-peak electric heating system, I've seen an EPC go up by 15 points by having a tank jacket put on it. It's madness, but it does sometimes happen. So it's to look out for those things. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's it. Obviously, every heating systems, a lot of them have got a lifetime to them. So I would not necessarily be asking landlords to think about anything but making sure a boiler is serviced up together and as and when it does actually go wrong and you can't get parts, get it replaced. Because again, it's a more expensive measure. There's no funding for landlords anymore for boiler replacements. It's very much seen that the heating system repairs and replacements are the landlord's responsibility as far as the grant systems go. So that's something to bear in mind as well. There is funding for things like the storage heater upgrades, but it tends to be when people have got on-peak heating now, not when they've got existing storage heaters, because obviously the potential gain from replacing those in terms of how the utility measures the carbon and financial savings of the grants they're providing, it doesn't offer the same benefit as going from on-peak to an off-peak. That's something else landlords can look at as well. Sometimes they can gain some points by putting in an off-peak supply, not without even putting the off-peak heaters in as well. I've seen that done a couple of times just to gain that 2, 3, 4 points more on an EPC as well. There's more low carbon technologies coming through. I just want to touch on that because there's a lot of confusion about, what is the roadmap for heating, for space heating going forward. When you look at a studio flat in Bournemouth, I mean, you're really going to be able to accommodate a heat pump on something like that. It's not going to be an easy one fits all solution. There's going to be a whole load of different solutions. One thing I would say, if landlords have got the opportunity to have a gas central heating system installed, as opposed to an electric boiler system or some other type of electric heating system, at least having some sort of wet central heating infrastructure is going to lend itself better to either a shift to hydrogen or a hybrid heat pump system where you're using a gas boiler as a backup to the heat pump, because a heat pump is a low surface temperature heating system, so it's not very responsive. So when you whack a thermostat up on that, it's not going to give you heat within 30, 40 minutes like you would do in a well-insulated hit home with a gas system. It would give you that in an hour and a half. So having a responsive heating system alongside it in terms of a hybrid system, I would expect is how a lot of properties will go over the next 5 to 10 years as well. And we're seeing more schemes kind of come through for some of that, but very slowly, and it's very piecemeal, and it's kind of the councils have got to bid in for it very last minute, and it's a very hit and miss scenario. But there will be more coming under the future utility schemes and everything else as well.
Yeah, I mean, am I right in saying with the heat pump, a lot of the efficiency of heat pumps relates to how well the property's insulated in the first place?
There is a big element to that, but particularly when you're looking at a ground source heat pump, which is not really going to be the favourite type of heat pump. The favourite obviously be an air source heat pump, which is more like a refrigerator you're sticking outside your home, and that's working in reverse. The ground source heat pump certainly is recommended pretty much always to be installed with an underfloor heating system. And obviously you need a well-insulated underfloor to make that work efficiently. And as you say, you get more coefficient of performance. In other words, how many units of electricity you put into how many of heat you get out by having a well-insulated home. So that's the way to go. Now, we all know we've got some very leaky old 1880s, 1900 homes in the rental sector locally. But there are things that can be done. There is assistance on the way, and there are scenarios in which it'll be possibly easier. And I'm thinking examples of detached student houses, for example, may lend themselves better to those kinds of systems, and obviously a block of flats would do. But I think they're going to be looking very much at blocks of flats in the future in terms of district heating systems, where you've got a central source of heat, and it comes into the block and gets distributed from that central source, and everyone gets metered off that central heating source. Again, it's a big undertaking, and it makes you shudder to think how it's all going to work with all the different ownerships involved. But the government are going to have to make these things happen if we're going to get anywhere near this net zero ambition, which is incredibly ambitious. Let me tell you, in terms of what can be done. So,
service charges then on those blocks with those coming in.
Yeah.
Please on to the devil's advocate question, Peter. So, what should landlords do if the EPC assessment basically says there is very little way they can improve their property to get it to standard? And we had this with when it raised to an E. There were some properties where maybe they were in blocks. They were at the top floor. They had a pitched roof. It wasn't within their control. What would you suggest to them who, when it gets to a C, might get the same issue? They just are told they cannot physically do it.
I think at the moment, obviously, there's always the exemption route, but I would be mindful of the exemption route because local authorities are starting to look at that now. So we're involved in a project with Dorset Council now, who are going through every area of the Dorset Council area and going through the exemptions register and finding that 65% of it is incorrect in terms of what's been lodged on there as an exemption, partly because the exemptions were for the no cost element, which obviously disappeared a couple of years ago, and then partly because no one's really trying, no one's uploaded quotes to prove that it's going to cost more than the threshold and all that type of stuff. So that is definitely a route, but I'd be mindful to make sure that it's properly approached and properly evidenced by the landlord when they go ahead and do it. Another thing is go off piste. When you look at an EPC, doesn't necessarily give you all the things you can do. It gives you the recommendations that the EPC suggests based on a reduced data set. But there are other things that you can possibly look to do depending on the property, which will still assist. There's often things there that you can do. As I mentioned, putting an off-peak supply in there. If someone's only a couple of points short, and that is the way of doing it, it's only going to cost 75 quid probably to get the meter changed. Then why wouldn't you do it? To get yourself compliant and sign it off and say, I'm done, I'm finished. So there are things like that sometimes don't necessarily show up. And also once you've another thing is actually, what is the ultimate score you can reach? When you start doing the other measures, it then starts, pushing everything up, and you realise that you can get higher as well as you go along. And also the EPC will be changing. So that will then have additional things on there, like smart thermostats, for example, which are only sort of 200-300 quid to install on a gas system. They will add points, possibly car charging points will do. Obviously, the renewable energy systems and different things will also add points as well. Not sure about other elements. I know there's things like combi saves. You can fit to combi boilers that reduce the wasted water when you're running through to temperature on a combi. Things like that may come into the EPC at some point. I really don't know, but there'll be more options on there in the next couple of years as well, which will probably assist landlords in getting those scores up.
Quickly going back to flats thing, because obviously the majority of the properties we do have houses, but we probably manage more flats. Would you be advising now leaseholders to be getting in touch with their block management to potentially discuss future measures?
I think it's a very good idea, because we've already seen situations where landlords are selling up because they can't meet the standards and they're worried about it. Which is then leading to blocks, not a mass exodus exactly, but empty units in blocks. And that can't be good for any management company to have empty units where they're not getting their service charges in and everything else. So I think they should be looking at it. To be fair, a lot of block management companies have looked at some of these staple measures over the years. I mean, we've been working with different blocks of flats, whether that's individual management committees or some of the bigger companies, to get big blocks of flats done. But it is very difficult, and with things like wall insulation, where you need the buy-in of every person there, it just takes one little domestic argument between two old ladies or something, where one person said, the smell of the chips from your kitchen gets in my kitchen window and I hate you and I'm not going to sign this paperwork now to have this work done. So it just comes down to the minutiae like that, some ridiculous things. So they should be looking at it. They should be looking at it as something to future-proof those properties, to make them a more attractive place to live, to reduce the running costs, to take them out of future legislation. As owner-occupiers as well, we are going to at some point be legislated on EPC ratings, or, I've been talking about it for years, penalising us through the council tax. They don't do anything like that right now. We're all struggling enough with COVID and all the other things that are going on, but they will double back to these things. So it won't just be landlords who are being asked to increase standards. Everybody will be getting asked to increase standards. So they should be looking at this.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We're obviously talking about landlords, but there's nothing coming in for homeowners at the moment. So it does seem it's very targeted at landlords, which, don't make up the entire population of rental property. So it feels to me there should be a complete standard, not just landlord specific. We should be doing our own homes as well.
Yeah. I think that where it's sprung from, obviously, especially in the southwest, is the private rented sector is the most energy efficient tenure. Yeah. It has been for a long time. It still is at the moment. Obviously, social housing have had the decent home standard to work towards, and have been working on that basis, and have been ahead of the curve, in most degrees. And we've had lots of schemes to help people insulate their homes. The owner occupiers are obviously in control of applying for that and going ahead or paying for it. But in the case of a landlord, they've kind of fallen behind with it. There's been no obligation to do it. It's taken a long time for any enforcement to come from the EPCs, but I've said since day dot, since EPC started to landlords, I know you don't think it's a very important bit of paper now, but believe you me, it will become one, and so it's proven to be. It's not a perfect system by any means, but I think it will improve, and it's being used for the basis of so many things. I mean, mortgage lenders now want an EPC within 2 years date of doing even a remortgage. Yeah. We're also seeing now lenders getting tighter on lending for HMO landlord properties and things. Everything's getting tighter. Everyone's taking less risk. And this is just one more risk of spend that they're worried about a landlord having to make, and not really allowing them to buy inefficient properties so much. So that comes into play as well. And mortgage lenders have got to report on their lending portfolio, and say what's our average EPC on our lending portfolio for buy to let, for private mortgages, etc. So that it's all coming in. So it's becoming more important, definitely.
I think we're noticing it. I mean, you touched obviously earlier on about grants and what's there might be things available. As it stands right now, is there anything kind of standing out available to clients to take advantage of?
Well, there's a few routes, and there's a few things floating around the periphery at the moment. So what we've got locally, starting off at kind of base level, is something called LEAP, which is Local Energy Advice Partnership. This would apply to tenants who are on low incomes, benefits, allowances, have any health condition. That could include something like asthma. They would qualify for it for free as well. The sort of things that this will do is draft proofing to wooden doors, windows, letterboxes, and supply LED light bulbs for about 5 different types of light fitting, all for free for those kinds of clients. So it's not just people on benefits, any health condition whatsoever, lower incomes, all that type of stuff will fit into that programme. We then have something called Healthy Homes Dorset, which runs across the whole of Dorset. And that will apply to landlords as well as, obviously with tenants and owner occupiers as well. That is for cavity wall and loft insulation. If the person behind the door has got a child under 5, they're over 65, again, got any sort of health condition, benefits, allowances, etc. It's up to £1,000 per property for cavity and loft insulation. In BCP area now, we've just had the Climate Action Insulation Grant be launched. In terms of private landlords, if they've got an E-rated property, I think it is, they would qualify in for that scheme. But actually, if you've got a landlord in the BCP area who's got an EPC of a D or an E, they would qualify under something they call flexible eligibility that we sign off for the council, Ridgewater, to be able to access energy company obligation or eco funding for a range of different measures. Doesn't have to be through us either. It can be through other installers who've got that funding. So that might include, again, cavity wall, loft insulation, room in the roof insulation, underfloor insulation, storage heater upgrades to the high heat retention storage heaters. Just bear in mind, not all these are full grants. It very much depends on the property itself, how many exposed walls the property's got, what the floor area is. Existing heating type makes a difference. If letting agents like yourself get people knocking on your door from companies like mine saying we're only interested in your electrically heated properties, the reason is because the funding is twice as good as it is for gas heated properties, basically. So those are the ones that people want to do. Those kinds of things are available via a declaration that the council sign off that we manage, if they're D or E, and that's an additional standalone criteria regardless of who lives there. So really, with getting from DE upwards, there's no excuse really at the moment in terms of if you can find someone who's willing to do the work, and this is one issue we have got. Supply chain is an issue,
yeah.
like with a lot of things at the moment. Not everybody, I mean, we haven't got the ability as we speak today to do room in the roof insulation. It's a complicated measure. It's subject to technical difficulties sometimes, and it's an expensive measure, so it can become more risky in a lot of ways for installers to approach. Also, it doesn't apply to the one type of property we really want it to apply to, which is where you've got a flat which is entirely encapsulated in the roof space. It only applies to properties that are classed as a room in the roof according to the RDSAP conventions, which is where you've got a masonette maybe with you've got your first floor as your main living area and your bedroom on the top floor in the slopes, or you've got a student house on 3 stories where the top floor is in the slopes, or you've got a chalet bungalow where you've got a ground floor and the bedroom up in the chalet slopes. So what we all know that the majority of the properties in roof spaces that we come across are where the whole flat is just on one floor up in the roof. No funding for that, unfortunately, which is a pain, because that's what we really could do with getting on and cracking into and sorting out, to be honest. So there's a mixed bag of things there, and there are some more things coming. We have been doing for the last 2.5 years a central heating scheme where we've been putting full gas central heating and gas connections in. We've done about 300 properties now on that, and that's coming to an end in March. So effectively it's closed, but we're bidding for another round of money, this time ourselves and not through a third party, to actually deliver some heat pumps through that funding, as well as some hydrogen-ready boilers, which sounds very posh, but hydrogen-ready boilers apparently is 95% of what's already on the market is hydrogen-ready.
Really?
So I'm told. So there are some more things coming there. There's some local authority delivery funds that we're bidding into. We did a short pilot, was doing solar PV and things like that, including we've managed to get 2 done on rental property, one out in the sticks for Rempstone Estates and one for DWP. And that was about all the time we had left, but proved that it does. Things like solar PV are expensive for landlords at the moment, obviously, but they do make a significant difference on the EPC for those who can do it. You know, they've got no other choices. And obviously with a 10 grand threshold, that brings something like PV squarely in with a cost of 5.5 to 8.5 grand for a good size system. So yeah, there's definitely things coming. There's going to be more coming. At some point, the government will bring something back to replace that disaster that they called the Green Homes Grant. They're under pressure to do so. Let's hope they bring something back a bit more organised. We didn't get involved in that, thankfully. I'm so glad we didn't. But hopefully they've learned the lessons and they're going to push it out as an energy efficiency project rather than just a Treasury-backed, financial recovery package, because that didn't really work, unfortunately.
So, I mean, I'm just going through the Rolodex of properties there, trying to think of the ones that you might be able to help out. So, if you can send us some links, Pete, to some of these funding areas or whatever, we'd love to see them, so to see if they are going to meet their requirements and meet what they might need. The stuff about the properties that are rated D and E, I think, is really important, because there's going to be lots of people that are in that boundary that will need some assistance, I think, in order to try and fund some of the works that are necessary to get them up to the latest gradings. But finally, just what is your overarching message to landlords who may be worried about these EPC changes? I guess help is at hand, but is there an overarching message?
Yeah, I think for us, we've always tried to do is say to landlords, like I say, take the right advice, plan it out, because you can do things gradually. You don't have to do everything at once. If you did do one window and one storage heater a year, and you could make the maximum investment tax efficiently, then clearly that's a win-win for everybody, for themselves, for the tenant, and for the wider environment. So I would say don't ignore it. Just have a look at it now. Get your EPC updated. Make sure it's correct. See what that EPC says now today, because things do change. And look at anything you can do. Start with the low cost, push through into the medium cost, explore what funding opportunities there are. Make a note of anything you can't do now, and keep an eye out for when there is something available to do it. And also, I would also say, what we have to do now in our sector is very much consider ventilation when we're doing insulation. So, for landlords also to help the condition of their property and its rentability and everything is to make sure that there's proper working extractor fans, trickle vents in windows, lockable window catches, all the things that give the tenant the tools to actually keep that property condensation free. Because as we insulate these properties more, we potentially trap more moisture inside them. So we need to give the tenant the tools as well to make sure when we're doing these things that they're done in the right way. But yeah, just don't ignore it. Keep an eye on what's going on. Of course, I would say this, stay in touch with us. We do have a letting agent newsletter that we do send out periodically. It doesn't go out very often, but we are going to be starting some kind of subscribe newsletter as well on our website very soon for different sectors. And we're obviously keen to work with landlords, as we always have done, to try and help them do things in the right way. But what you get from us is you'll get best advice. You won't get us trying to push you towards a certain technology or measure, because we can advise on all of them. Even if we can't directly help install them for you, then there'll always be someone else that can. But as long as you know you're doing the right thing, then that's half the battle.
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much.
So quick note to our landlords then. Let's just, this obviously will go out to our regular customers, which get told all the time about EPC stuff. They're sick of hearing from me, James, about EPC stuff. But let's assume you're watching this video and you're on YouTube, or you found us on YouTube, or you found one of our runs on Facebook, and you don't have an agent currently. If you want to find your EPC, you just need to go onto the government portal, EPC register, and click on the domestic register, put in your postcode, and it will bring up your EPC. It is available information. It's not a secret document that is hidden away somewhere. It's the first thing we look for when we market a property. It does last 10 years, and I'm sure you would recommend, Pete, if the EPC is now maybe 8-9 years old and you've had work done in the last 2-3 years, it may be worth getting that reassessed. Even though it's in date, it may be worth getting that reassessed to see if your score has gone up. So maybe you have less to do. Would you recommend that, Peter?
Totally agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are situations where it will go up just by doing a new EPC. There's been situations where it goes down. If the boiler's got older in that period, you might see a slight drop in the rating, but very often it works to your advantage to get it redone. Yeah. Plus, it brings other recommendations in that maybe you weren't on one from 6, 7, 8 years ago, which are now there. Like your high heat retention heat has been a good example. Yeah. So it's definitely worth doing. And let's be honest as well. Compared to living out in the rural areas of Dorset, if we've got properties in BCP, we've got cavities going back to 1880 in Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch. We've got it easy when it comes to insulating walls compared to trying to do a cob-walled cottage out in Stour Fitzpaine or something, So it's not always that hard, to be quite honest,
Yeah, don't be scared. Get the advice.
Yeah, if you've got any questions, please give us a call or give Peter a call, and we'll be delighted to help you and try and get these things and get these standards up. And thank you very much, Pete. Thanks for joining us. It's been really great to listen to you and hear about these things and offer some further advice to landlords on this subject. So thank you very much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me today. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.